The St. James turned out to be crowded with men trying to break into the movies and scraping by on what they could make as extras. A few others were retired bit players, old men who'd always put their earnings in a sock instead of a bank, and after the crash still had enough to cover the rent in a cheap place like the St. James. One of the old guys I talked with that day was Ray Mullins. He was not anybody whose name you would recognize, but he'd ridden in a bunch of cowboy movies, mostly in the silence, and fallen off plenty of horses before he got too stove up to keep doing it. Now that I'm looking back, I have to wonder why Ray didn't try to talk me out of getting into the business. He'd shattered both his ankles when a horse fell over backward on top of him, and when I met him he was gimping along with a pained grimace. It hurt him that much to walk. But he was happy to talk to me about every gag he'd ever done, some so dangerous and wild he might have been making 'em up. He bragged about every wreck, too. He'd broken an arm and 4 ribs, had his lung punctured, 2 or 3 concussions. When he broke his ankles, he was on location up at Lone Pine and had to be driven 100 miles to a hospital, loaded into the back of a station wagon. Somebody gave him a quart of Old Crow to kill the pain. He was grinning as he told me this. Now he was coming up on 70 years old, and he couldn't stand straight to piss, but he was tickled pink to send me down that same road. And the truth is, I'd come to Hollywood looking for some danger, so I was happy to follow his lead. You could get busted up doing almost anything on a ranch. Hell, you could die while you were rounding up cattle. But I had the idea that if I was killed making movies, maybe I'd go out in a blaze of glory trying to stop a runaway stagecoach. Ray said the studios making all the cheap cowboy pictures had their offices clustered around Gower Street. Lily'd been right about that, but he called it Gower Gulch, which was a slap at the fellas parading around the neighborhood in their cheap cowboy clothes. I guess Ray could see how green I was because he made a point of saying I wouldn't spot any horses tied up along Gower Gulch. The pictures mostly got made elsewhere. He was just sending me to the studio offices. He fished out a piece of paper and wrote down a few names, casting directors he was friendly with, and second unit men who might hire me as a writer. And in case I didn't get on with any of them, he gave me a telephone number to call, a switchboard for people wanting day work as an extra. If I hit it lucky, they might be looking for writers, he said. It was after 4:30 by then, too late in the day to hop on the streetcar and start looking for work. I should have been holding on to what money I had left. The St. James, cheap by Hollywood standards, was still more than I'd counted on. Instead, I went around the corner to a diner and spent 4 bits on a bowl of clam chowder. I must have figured I'd be on some studio's payroll by the next morning and shortly riding a horse alongside Buck Jones. The day had been hot, and when the sun went down, it didn't get any cooler. In my room, I peeled off all my clothes and lay down naked on the bed. I could hear voices through the thin walls, toilets flushing and the rush of water in the pipes, cars going by and streetcars squealing their brakes, people calling to each other and banging the lids of trash cans, and every so often an ambulance or police siren or somebody laying on a car horn. I'd learned, over the last year, to sleep in a room full of snorers, but I'd never had to sleep with all this racket of a big city at night. Plus, I was used to sleeping in the dark, not with neon signs flashing and street lamps pouring light through the paper shade on the window. I don't know if I ever did fall asleep completely. It seemed as if I was always in a half-dream, riding a Greyhound bus as it swayed up on 2 wheels, or lying on my back in a field of dry weeds, looking up into the broad faces of dairy cows. I'd saved a couple of oranges from the grapevine fruit stand, which I ate for breakfast, but I was stale from lack of sleep, so I went back to the diner and paid for coffee.